To the MC Farris Exhibition and Artist Talk today. So I have a few announcements to make before we get started with the Artist Talk. On behalf of the Art Gallery Committee and the South Texas College Art Department, I want to welcome you. And also, if you would please, those of you who came, always, anytime you come to the gallery, whether it's for an event or not, if you'll please sign the registry, which is out there on the podium. And if you would like to know about future events, we encourage you to put your email address down there legibly. I repeat, legibly, so we can read it. Anyway, so put that down and we'll contact you about future events that are happening here. Just a few quick things. There's no drink or food in the gallery with the exception of the artist to my left. Also, if you are walking around, please do not touch the artwork. So all that Cheeto dust that you guys eat and potato chip dust on your fingers, that damages the artwork. So please do not touch the artwork. If you're wearing a hat, just be mindful if you have a bill on the hat, you want to get close to see some details, just be aware of, how far that's out. You don't want to touch. Also, if you have a backpack on, you might want to move it to the front so that as you're moving around, you don't bump into the artwork. So just be mindful of those things. Anything you carry in with you, be aware of where it is, and so as you're walking around, we don't touch the artwork. So I'd like to thank the Art Gallery Committee for all their hard work to make our exhibitions possible, and in particular Genesis Ramirez. I'm not sure, is Genesis in here? Yeah, Genesis is our art gallery assistant. She does 90% of the work, makes the rest of us look good. The secretary of the art department, also Angela Orta, does a lot of work for us, so we thank her, and the chair of the art department, Jason Ramirez. We also want to thank our dean, Dr. Christopher Nelson, and the president of the college, Dr. Carlos Solis, for their continued support for all of the arts that we have here. We encourage you to attend all the art exhibitions, of course, and we have exhibitions on all of our campuses, so they all have visual art spaces. There's artwork you can see throughout the year, and you can check our website, you can check the Library Art Gallery website for more information about that. So for today, though, we have some upcoming exhibitions right after Mr. Farris's exhibition. We have our annual student juried exhibition, and that's always a big one for us. And so this year, the juror for the exhibition is Marcelo Ramirez, and he is the curator at the McAllen International Museum of Art and Science. So that's his job, is to curate exhibitions. So we look forward to him coming and choosing the artwork that makes it into the exhibition and the artwork that wins awards. I was told earlier that we have a little over 170 entries this year into the exhibition. That's huge. I think that might actually be a record. They can probably tell. So what that means is every student who entered artwork, they pay $3 per entry up to three entries. So $3 per artwork, over 170 artworks. You can do the math. You've all had a math class. That money is split between the winners. So we have some chosen winners that the curator will pick, and they get the money. We also give away art supplies, so we look forward to that exhibition. That's coming up next week. Following that exhibition, we have our annual high school emerging artist exhibition. And so we have some local high schools that come, and their students are allowed to show their work here in the college gallery, which is a big deal for them. It's also a very good recruiting effort for us. And then this summer, we have the biennial ceramic showdown and exhibition, which our ceramic professor, Mr. Leonard, hosts and runs. And so we're looking forward to that. That'll be a good one. So we encourage you to attend all of those if you have a chance. Okay? All right, so I've known MC Farris for, 20 some odd years, I guess. Anyway, at least that. We attended Texas Tech together. We're doing our master's degree, and we've exhibited together. We've collaborated together on artwork. We've served on committees together. We've served on boards together. And I can tell you, after all this time, all these years, I still don't know what his artwork's about. I'm kidding. I actually do know what his artwork's about. But MC Farris, is an associate professor of art at UTRGV. He earned his Bachelor of Fine Arts degree at Texas Tech University. He attended Skowhegan School of Painting and Sculpture. He earned his Master of Fine Arts degree at Texas A&M Commerce and his Master of Art Education degree at Texas Tech University. His artwork is exhibited locally and throughout Texas. I think he's exhibited in almost every major city in Texas and a lot of minor ones too. And he's also exhibits nationally and internationally. I'll just name a few of the locations. St. Petersburg, Florida, Baton Rouge, Louisiana, Boston, Massachusetts, Santa Fe, New Mexico, New York City, Brooklyn, New York, Las Vegas, Nevada, Seattle, Washington, Reynosa, Mexico, several cities in Puerto Rico, Florence, Italy, and that's just to name a few. His work is also collected widely. He's in lots of art collections. And so without further ado, it's my pleasure to introduce MC Farris.
Thank you. First and foremost, thank everybody for coming out. Thank the Genesis, especially. She had to put up with me and help me get this stuff in here. Thank you for the gallery committee. STC is probably one of my favorite places in terms of faculty. You guys always have such a great camaraderie, and we get a lot of use out of what you teach your students when they get to me over at UTRGV, so I appreciate all that. In terms of the work, I'm kind of all over the map in some ways. My interests vary from punk rock to old westerns to samurai movies to graffiti to skate culture, tattoo culture, all this stuff. As a kid, I grew up in a small West Texas town, and so a lot of what I had, you guys know this, you live in the valley. We have limited sources sometimes in terms of museums, galleries, and so we don't always see stuff. So a lot of what I was seeing was skate decks. It was album covers. It was stickers. It was posters. It was, at some point, then it became MTV, and then it became tattoo culture. Then it became combination of all this stuff, and then it becomes, I'm looking at beat poets, I'm looking at current writers, I'm listening to this, I go from listening to, I grew up basically, my mom listened to everything, and my dad said there's only two kinds of music, country and western. So I have taken both extremes and gone either way. I mean, to the point my parents will tell you that I got way too many records. All this stuff influences me. I'm a collector, I make stuff. I try to make stuff I like. And there's been points in my career where it's like, oh, I'm making this stuff because it sounds academically sound. It's going to get me a show because I've got this university job. When COVID hit, I kind of just went back. I was like, screw it. I'm going to make the work that I want to make, why I want to make it. If it makes sense to anybody else, great. If not, for me, a lot of this is just the act of making work. I try to come up with an idea or a theme, and then I just try to run it into the ground until I get tired of doing it or it morphs into something else. So this is a collection of work that's roughly, I've been working on since 2017, 2018, off and on. There's probably half a dozen really new pieces in here. This is one of the newer ones. These two little ones are new. The tiger, a couple of the cutouts are newer, and quite a few of these drawings on the wall are newer. I go through this phase where I like to make big pieces, but it's not always that, it's not feasible for most of us. Because you have to think about storage. Where do I put all this stuff? If any of my friends have been to my house, you know that my garage is full of crates that are full of old works. Because I work on these large pieces. And so I try to work smaller. Paper's always easier to cram under the bed or in a flat file. I don't know. Let's go into kind of questions. I do better if you guys have a question or you want to talk about a certain piece or group of work. Has anybody got a question you want to start with? Yeah, either one. Yeah, there's Raymond Pettibon did a lot of the punk rock covers I liked as a kid, did Black Flag stuff, i.e. that's why there's a tribute. If you look at the sticker out here, it looks like the Segmented Texas. That is a takeoff of the band Black Flag's actual, their icon for their band. It's artists, everything. Like I said, Winston Smith, Robert Williams, Barry McGee, Espo. I'm trying to think of some of the graffiti writers I like. I like a little bit of everything. Jean-Michel Basquiat was a big influence when I first started out. Andy Warhol. I like the pop aesthetic. I like kind of the neo stuff that was Basquiat was doing. You can see kind of Basquiat's influence probably more so in my earlier works than you can some of this stuff. You get a little bit of it because of the layering and the things, and sometimes you'll find silhouettes or hidden images under some of this stuff. That was more prominent in my early work. Yeah, I mean, part of what I teach at UTRGV is contemporary art issues, so I kind of still try to strive and stay in this contemporary zeitgeist of what's going on now. Part of that influence is I'm also a big toy collector for the vinyl artist toys, and so that stuff is slowly creeping in and influencing my work as well. What else? Anybody else got a question? Yes, Chris.
On comics, Mad Magazine, we're doing 4-panel comics in art appreciation, and today's 20-year-olds have never heard of Mad Magazine.
That and if you want to get into the whole underground comic stuff, and that's a big part of what I like as well, lastgasp.com has one of the largest collections of underground. Forbidden Comics is another one. Yeah, comics are a big more of an influence than I probably give them credit for.
Well, because Mad Magazine is one that I guess you could get in trouble if you're in 6th grade, but over time it becomes very rated G, I think, and on that serious parody, which seems to permeate your work.
Yeah, I mean, my stuff.
Is that something you saw? It's like, whoa, you can do that, or
yeah, part of yeah, I mean,
do that, or does that just grow out of?
I think it's a little bit
Evolution.
both, maybe a little bit. I mean, organically, because I'm interested in so many things. Some of this stuff is tongue-in-cheek political statements. Some of it is just admiration for illustration and imagery, and some of it's me working out, personal issues about where we are in society. You can tell some of this stuff is about guns and cops, and that's my political end of that stuff. I kind of come across this idea that no matter what I think that as Americans we do not pay our teachers, our public servants enough, and I think part of that, if these guys earned real living wages, you expect them to go out and educate our kids and protect us and do all this stuff, but yet we don't want to pay them enough. And so part of that, I'm totally not about defunding the police or any of that stuff. My attitude is nothing gets better unless somebody does better. And so part of the idea, when you look at statements like fuck the police and stuff like that, it's more for me, it's about, yes, fuck you until the good start taking control over the bad. And I think you can apply that to a lot of little things in our society. As far as the comic book influence and stuff, you can see it, and some of the imagery I'm using. Part of that is me going back and kind of messing with the idea of pop art images. We get to underground comics and stuff like that. I mean, R. Crumb, one of my favorites as well. I don't know.
Can I ask just one more?
Sure, yeah.
Because your answers are pretty on point. But on then a design standpoint, sweet repetition of the stripes, which actually reminds me of, I don't know, some gum that more than a rainbow.
So you're talking about
you're
talking about the gum that had the goofy horse on it.
Yeah.
That I forget what that stuff's called. No, this is actually so the pinstriping idea was kind of started off as one idea and then kind of fell into another one. One, I like it just as an aesthetic. I think it breaks the image up. It gives it a different kind of, it separates it from not necessarily male female, but doesn't necessarily separate it from a race thing either. But the idea behind this all started with the idea of I look at images, especially with tattoo culture and stuff like that, in comic books, same thing. So much of this stuff is repetition. You'll see a gypsy head, there's probably 100,000 different versions of tattooed gypsy heads. Same thing with a tiger or the Hanya mask or any of that stuff. There's gonna be tons of it. So it's part of that is my interpretation, putting my, like a better word, stamp on it. But the original idea with the pinstriping was holding patterns off the TV. It was that idea that in my brain, from Buddhas to samurais to all this stuff is floating around, and so I keep repeating some images because I think it's kind of like a holding pattern. It's stuck in there, and I also think it's a societal thing. We all recognize a woman's head. We all recognize some of this imagery, if we're into that skate culture, tattoo culture, or not. So over time, what's happened with the pinstriping, it's kind of more and I still look at it as kind of a holding pattern because it's still in the idea that these are topics, these are ideas that still need to be discussed or redefined or defined in general. Now the pinstriping is a little bit more about just taking out skin tones or where any human-esque looking image in here can be anything. But it applies to the animals. It's all the ideas that everything like I said, it's somewhere between being taking out skin tones and being a holding pattern.
I like that.
All right. Well, thanks. I appreciate you like it.
No, I mean.
I know. I'm just giving you a hard time, Chris. All right. Who else? It answered your questions?
Well, it's simple, powerful, and effective.
All right, good. You know, I rehearsed that all for 3 minutes before I got here. Do you have a question?
What, in terms of like technical and medium, do you use paint mostly, especially for like the line work, or do you use like marker?
I am a mixed media guy. I will, if it requires spray paint, I will spray paint it. So basically the technique, it took me a while to kind of really, I was initially taking the ruler and like a Montana or a paint marker, acrylic-based marker, and making these lines. And then it just gets, it's not productive in terms of time. Now on the drawing, a lot of times, even on the paper, I use this pinstripers tape. It's just auto body tape. It's about maybe an eighth, quarter-inch thick, wide. So the lines don't vary necessarily. Now if you look at some pieces, you can actually tell I went in there with a ruler and a marker, and so some lines will be a little thinner, some will be a little, but I kind of tend to mess with them like they're skin tones in the sense that, you know, it doesn't have to be a perfect line. It could be jagged, it could be broken, just like anything on your, you know, if you tattooed your skin like that. Now, tell me the question again.
I was asking also for like the black, the outlines that you do. Do you use paint?
Oh, okay, yeah, material-wise, yeah. So what I'm using is mainly everything is acrylic-based. I use primarily, I've got where I really like Montana acrylic-based markers. They work really well. I like acrylics in the context. I can go back in with ammonia or some kind of glass cleaner and thin these things out and get different layers. You know, the heavy line work around a lot of stuff is kind of early influences, I guess a little bit of German expressionism in that context. As far as materials, I mean, I kind of just use whatever works. If I need to, I've learned different stuff over the years, especially part of what I teach, I've got a couple students here that will tell you, I make them go out and get like 4 or 5 different kinds of ink, watercolors, different kinds of pencils, different kinds of acrylics, and I encourage them to really experiment with this stuff, because a lot of this stuff, you don't know what you can do with it until you play with it. And unfortunately, a lot of the stuff that I use, it's good for 1 or 2 times, and you're like, yeah, that's not going to work. Spent $20 and now, but that's part of art. That's part of it, the experimentation of this. There's no real method to my madness in some sense. I just kind of come up with an image and I shoot it on there. I use a projector. If you hadn't figured it out, because of Beware Blind Artist, I am technically, as they say, legally blind, but I'm on the cusp of it. I can drive and do all that, you know, I can feed myself and all that kind of stuff. So initially, that was part of the motivation, is do these large pieces. It's easier for my eyesight. But then, you know, as you grow as an artist, if you look at my website, you can go back in the archives and you can see how I started out and where I am now. I think I like to think I'm better than I was, which surely applies to all of us after you've been doing this for 20 plus years. What else do I use? I play around with clear coats, lacquers, different stuff that I know. Certain lacquers and certain markers will chemically react. And so I can bury a drawing under 2 or 3 layers of cheap acrylic house paint, put that lacquer, that clear coat on it, give it a little bit to absorb, and it'll slowly bring that image up like a ghost image. So I just kind of play with all that stuff. I use stencils, whatever I need to do. If I need to draw an image, throw it in the computer, manipulate it, resize it, flip it, whatever I do. That's kind of where I come from this stuff. I am real big in, you know, a little bit like Picasso. I steal everything I can get my hands on in terms of image appropriation sometimes, and try to figure out how to recycle, reuse that, repurpose it so it, you know, like stills out of movies, closing in on the, you know, cropping stuff a certain way, or flipping it, or putting it in the computer and re-angling it. So a big part of that's what I kind of teach over there, is this idea that, you know, it's hard to come up with original ideas. You know, we're inundated with so much data on a daily basis. Even just for the 20 minutes you're messing with your phone half the time. So it's hard to kind of process stuff. And so I tend to like collect images, and then when I get ready to work on a new piece, I just sit there and I go through stuff, and, you know, I either have to be triggered by something I've just seen on TV, read, or I'm listening to some band, and if it gives me an idea, I kind of run with it and then just develop it and see if it turns out. All right, any other questions? Yeah.
Which one was the most difficult piece for you?
In what context?
Like what you had the most hard time, and it was like the most exhausting painting for you to do.
Oddly enough, recently, this is a newer one, this Some Like It Violent, was a little harder to kind of figure out how I wanted that to look and how it reads and stuff like that. I'm still not sure that it actually played off like I wanted it to. And it's basically kind of making fun of my childhood in the context of, you know, if you're 40 and older, you probably realize that, you know, saw ads for BB guns and all the stuff we grew up with looked like, you know, stuff that now kids get shot for. So it's kind of a play off of this because that's actually an ad for a live action, real sounding BB gun or toy gun or whatever. I mean, the ad, that's where all the burp, that's literally in the ad. It looks like an official gun ad, but it's for a toy. And so you play off that idea, and we can talk gun culture all day. It turns into a whole other conversation. But yeah, for that reason, yeah, it was just kind of, anytime I'm dealing with something I know is kind of politically or socially loaded, it can kind of be a little, because you have to figure out how, you know, just because I read it a certain way doesn't mean anybody else in here, they can look, oh, that guy's off his rail. There's no way that doesn't make sense to me, you know. So I get that, and that's a big part of why I think what we do as artists is I tell my classes, my best thing I can teach you is how to think for yourself. Be more mindful of what you're doing, do your research, be aware of when you present stuff, how does it read? Just because it reads one way to you doesn't mean it reads that way to the rest of the class. So I kind of play with that idea in my work and also in my classrooms. All right, another question, Ben.
What's your interpretation of negative space? Because I feel like there's like a unintentional meaning to it.
Not necessarily. I mean, a lot of it is just, sections like this and, you know, stabbing at the ocean piece over here. It's just when I'm trying to be more painterly, if that makes any sense. Because I feel like a lot of what I do is more illustrative than it is painting in some ways. And so there are moments where I aspire to be more of a painter, or a painter's painter, if that makes any sense to anybody. Making stuff look maybe a little more natural or realistic, more like an actual, I don't know, to a lot of, I mean, I know these all look like paintings, but to me a lot of them are, it's almost like it could be pages in a book or a comic book, and it reads, you know, which would read different as well. Does that answer your question at all?
Yeah.
Sort of. All right, saw another hand. Yeah.
What was the experience exhibiting in Italy? Did they resonate with it? I mean, how did that go?
That was more of a pop-up show. I was teaching over there for a summer session, and I'd made just little works. And we basically had a pop-up show in one of the houses we had, you know, were working out of. So it was kind of a group show. I did a group show with all my students. Everybody makes work while you're there, and then we made a flyer, tried to get locals to come, you know, stuff like that. Well, my experience in Italy was, my experience in Japan was probably better in terms of like sharing my imagery, you know, I make a bunch of stickers. Like all the stuff you see out here on the windows and stuff is stuff I make stickers out of, or t-shirts. And so a lot of times when I go places, I hand that stuff out. And so I usually get good response for that stuff. I will say when I went to Japan, the first thing, you know, my business card has, or my current one has a geisha on it that I did. It's not from this series, but it says in Japanese, you know, forget to think about you almost every day. So I hand it to this guy and he's like, oh, you almost got that right. Same thing with the little guy up front, you know, he's got the little hand in, it says beware blind artist in Japanese. I actually do not speak Japanese, I don't write it, but I have friends that do. And that's just one of my methodologies. If I can, yes, I could source this all offline. But I find it better when you're dealing with a language that you don't speak and you don't write, find somebody that's fluent in it and does, and be their new best friend. Because to me, it looks more authentic. Then I have something, I look at it like that writing is like something for me to draw. You know, I've got to figure out how to draw that so it reads like correctly on the canvas or on the t-shirt or whatever. Just think anything you guys would do in terms of research if you're creating an ad work or something like that. What else?
I also wanted to ask about the process a bit. Do these come easy to you, or do you have to sit on it for a while?
Everything comes a little harder than it used to. I find that a couple of summer ago, I went up north to where my folks lived and rented a room, and it works, you know, because that's all that was in the space. It was just materials and me, and no distraction, no TV, just a radio. In those situations, I feel I'm a little more productive. I find that when I teach and throughout the year, I mean, some other faculty will probably kind of agree, if it's not what you're, like I work with Professor Jerry Lyles. He paints in class with the students. I don't do that. So he can get work done. He can be working on a piece while he's teaching them how to do that. My process, because of my eyesight and stuff, I kind of just tend to kind of stay in my own studio space, just so I don't have to. A lot of the stuff I do is I'm up on the canvas, like, fairly close. And so it's not good for demonstrations. It's not good for me to, I mean, I can show you how I do it, but if I'm really painting and I want to get stuff done, I pretty much don't need anybody around me. As far as my studio practice, because I get distracted easy. I don't have ADHD, but I come from that, that era of where they're like, oh, you got too much energy. Go outside and come back after dark. Go play in the yard. Go play in the street. Do something else besides. And so I go in spurts. I spend a lot of time just reading, watching stuff, listening to music, writing stuff down. I keep pads of paper by the computer. I got one by the, wherever I sit. One occasionally I watch TV. I've got, I got little notebooks everywhere. I keep notes in my phone. So one of the ideas I'm working on right now is this idea of language and taking phrases, if it's something like kill your masters or whatever, but taking it out of context and putting it on canvas and trying to, I haven't started this series yet. I'm still like I said, I mean, it takes me, I've been thinking about this for probably 6 months. I'm writing stuff down, I'm drawing sketches, I'm thinking about, all right, what does this look like? Do I want it on canvas? If I make this 20, because usually when I look at a series, I start off with the idea of 20, 25 images. And that's my goal. Once I get there, then if it expands and goes somewhere else. Same thing with like these wood cutouts. When I got on that tear of doing that, that was influenced by Larry Bob Phillips out of Albuquerque. His stuff is totally different. All his stuff is pretty much black and white. But he gave me this idea because years ago they came down and he did a show here, and he literally paints on the wall. He goes around the whole gallery and physically. He comes out a week early and he physically draws on the wall, and then he does these wood cutouts and lays it over that stuff. And so it kind of gave me that idea. So I'll get on a tangent. I'll do stuff like that. I'll make 20 pieces. But as long as the series is still interesting me, I keep making stuff as far as studio practice goes. But I also, a couple of my students will tell you, I'm got goofy supply list of all stuff that you only need 3 of these things, but here's a bunch of stuff you should be looking at and figuring out how to use. So I do that a lot. I do a lot of just playing around, as I say, and just kind of trying to figure it out and see if I get the aesthetic or the look. And if it's a paint technique that I'm not familiar with, then you got to spend time trying to figure out how to teach yourself that. So, all right, any other questions? Yes? My favorite piece? As far as the large work goes, probably somewhere between the stabbing into the abyss, the samurai stab in the ocean, and this kill your masters piece right now. As far as the wood cutouts, the gypsy, the bear, the tiger, the large tiger in the other room, and the gypsy head and the Hanya massacre, those 4 or 5 are my favorite out of those. I still kind of like my Frosty Heartthrob piece over here. I like my, it's not deputy dog, what is that? Whatever the horse's name. Looks like the Juicy Fruit horse, but that's not who he is. Stuff like that. I mean, that's kind of where I'm at. Any other questions? Yes? Oh, somebody's got a...
It has to do with display. I asked you earlier, too. This half seems like it's like the white cube aesthetic, and then this half is more like salon style.
Yeah, that's...
Close together, and then these are spaced out. Is there a reason to any of this? Or?
Kind of twofold. One, I just thought it looked... when we came and laid the show out, I kind of gave Genesis free reign. I said, because initially I was thinking, we'll space these wood pieces out between everything, and then you start realizing there's a lot of work here. And so I said, well, let's just treat this a little bit more like a tattoo flash wall. If you've ever been to a tattoo shop or you've seen tattoo flash, that's kind of the thing. It might have a theme, but it usually has half a dozen or a dozen little images on it. You go in the shop, you pick that, I want that bear, and that's what they give you. Then the salon style aspect of that was, I just kind of left it up to her and said, I thought it would look a little bit, I don't know, I think it turned out great. I think these guys did a great job. It's probably one of the better looking shows I've done in a while. They did a great job. I mean, most places don't go to the extreme and make you nice, big, vinyl decals and do all that stuff. So that's great. What else? What else you got? You're the contemporary historian. You're supposed to. She's not even listening.
Me?
Yeah, you.
That was my question.
Oh, okay. I thought maybe you're the contemporary art historian. I thought.
To also tell students about your process, your journey, becoming an art professor, and like.
Yeah. So the way I got into doing all this stuff is, let's think. Now you got me going all the way back, Melissa. Let me think. So I get out of high school, and I go to college for a year, and I think it sucks, and I don't want to do it. I luckily grew up with parents that, if I wanted to pursue college, I could. I don't ever felt like it was pushed on me. And I hated school. My mom will sit there and she's over there. She'll tell you, I skipped school. I got in trouble. I did whatever I could not to be at school a lot of times, especially through high school. And I lived in a little town, and it wasn't like it was brutal or anything. It was just high school. It just sucked. So I go off to college for a year, that kind of And then Buddy and I work one summer, and then we move out to LA. That lasts for a little bit. And then I end up in Arizona. And then my dad calls and said, I found a way for you to go to school and it won't cost you a bunch of money. And so I come back and I get my undergrad degree at Tech, finish that up at Tech. Fast forward, I end up in Colorado for a while. I think that's where, yeah. Then we ended up in, then I go back to grad school, get into grad school at Texas A&M Commerce, hour east of Dallas. Ran through that. While I was there, I got to go to Skowhegan School of Painting and Sculpture, which the faculty that recommended me, to this day, I think Michael Miller was really surprised that I got in. Because when I went to Skowhegan, if you're familiar with Trenton Doyle Hancock out of Houston, he was an undergrad when I was there. We both went to Skowhegan at the same time. And so at that point in 97, it was a little bit of unheard of for Skowhegan to pick two people, not only from the same state, but it's less from the same school. So that was a kind of a big deal in that context, in that time frame. Did that, moved back to LA, lived out there for a while. Went from LA, lived in Las Vegas for 3 years, worked at the Yadro Gallery in the Venetian Hotel for about 3 years. Then traded that in for managing a body piercing shop for a couple of months, and then my buddy started a coffee shop in San Francisco. I moved to San Francisco and ended up living with like 10 other people. Did that till 9/11 hit. And then everybody split and ran because they got scared because we were, you couldn't get across the Oakland or the Golden Gate Bridge at that time. So I stayed down there till December, came back, ran into some friends who were like, oh, you got an MFA? And I'm like, yeah. And he's like, you need a job? And I was like, doing what? And they're like, oh, you could come teach for us at Tech. And I'm like, it was not on my radar at all. Teaching was just like, and then when I got in there and got doing it, I was like, oh, this will supply me a cushion for my art habit. And then the more you get into it, you think, oh, teaching will push me, and it does. That's one of the reasons I like teaching on this level, is as opposed to high school. That I got certified teacher kindergarten high school. I got there and I was like, I'm not doing this. I can't do it. I have a hard enough time dealing with adults that can hold a conversation, much less add hormones and everything else that goes on in high school into it. And I got into teaching, and it still, turned out I was okay at it. I enjoy it. It keeps me busy in terms of that. It's a little frustrating. I don't like the politics of any kind of corporate-based job. It's not really how my brain works. But I enjoy the teaching aspect of it 100% more than I ever thought I would. So I got into that and did that at Tech for a little bit, and got to that point where I either got to teach high school because they weren't going to hire me full time, or I got to go somewhere else. And then right about the time, if anybody remembers Richard Heisland from back in the day when it was UTPA, he calls me up on the phone. Hey, I saw you lecture in Austin. You need a job? I was like, doing what? He's like, we just need somebody to come work for a year, do art education. So that's how I ended up down here. I got here, they had a new chair. Next thing you know, I've got a tenure track position. A few years later, I'm tenured, and I've been here ever since. So that's how I got into teaching. It was totally just like, I kind of looked at it like it was, hopefully it was going to just stay a side hustle, but it's turned out. Teaching has given me a career in the context. It's allowed me to do a lot of travel, and all those aforementioned places probably wouldn't have happened if I hadn't have been associated with the university or teaching here or somewhere else. So that's kind of how I got into teaching. And, as an artist, I encourage you guys are if you're under, anybody in this room, if you're halfway smart with technology at this point, being an artist is 100% easier today, I think, in some ways than it was. I'm sure Scott or Tom or Chris or one of these guys closer to my age can sit there and tell you that at some point, the only way anybody is going to see your work in New York or any of these countries is if you physically took a portfolio, went to the gallery, found somebody and made them look at it. You could send it in all the time you want. I mean, it's so much cheaper for you guys to put a portfolio together, put it on Instagram and share it with the world, put it on your website. I had to make the work, photograph the work, make slides, print those slides, put these packets together. It ended up costing you anywhere from $25 to $100 a packet, and then you would just end up leaving it at some gallery, hoping that they would call you back, and occasionally they'd mail it back to you and say, sorry, we don't like your stuff. But generally, you're just out the $50 or whatever it costs to make that stuff. So now it's 100% better, I think. You guys can create an Instagram profile for your everyday life. You can have one for your art. So all this stuff now, I think, aids in the marketing of it. But it also opened up and flooded the market with a bunch of stuff that we all saw during the pandemic. You're like, how are they getting paid to make that? It was bizarre. I watched one woman, she sold 600 paintings at $100 a piece during the pandemic, made 60 grand. And I couldn't tell you if she knew how to paint her way out of a paper bag or not. It just didn't, it was just wild. To me, that's the great thing about the net. I mean, you can now reach so many people and show them so much stuff. And so that's changed the definition of art to some degree. It's also changed, I think, the way I look at it from an aesthetic standpoint. There's a lot of stuff that pre-internet, based on how we were taught in art school, you would have thought that's garbage. But now it's part of the aesthetic. All right, what else? Any other questions? Yes.
That's also a question that I was wanted to lead into about just the nature and how we kind of pop art. Do you take that now as like, do you like to call yourself a pop artist, or do you feel like you fall into that? Do you like the label? Do you not? Like, because I feel like it has that context of like when that was for a public mass media.
Yeah, I mean, don't get me wrong. Between Basquiat, Warhol, Manuel Ocampo, there is that definite tie to pop culture. I love trash culture. I love pop culture. I like all this stuff. I like comparing and contrasting and juxtaposition, stuff that doesn't look like it should go together, because that's kind of, I think, how our society is. We're just kind of, all this stuff is just thrown in a blender and you see what sticks on the wall. But yes, there is, I don't have a problem being titled, I guess I'd rather fall under that lowbrow pop surrealist category, but I know that pop surrealism's kind of morphed into hyper-realism, from a cartoony standpoint, so that I don't know that I necessarily fall into that pop surrealist standpoint, but yeah, lowbrow pop artist, I'm okay with those labels. What else? Anybody else?
One more question. One more. Okay. Make it a good one. All right.
I'll ask you this one, and I think because
You waited this long, right?
I was thinking this here. It's a topic that I think a lot of artists, it might be a lame question, but you talked about image making. Sometimes you just throw it into Blender, right? And one of the things that I don't have an answer to, but I think a lot of artists are starting to think about is the advent of artificial intelligence. And it's effectively what it's doing. It's taking like prior knowledge images, and it is like reformatting it. So how do you see like your image making, what you're doing, like your pop art influence, which I think is, I should also add, I think it's awesome what you're doing.
Thank you.
But how do you see the impact of something like that into this grand scope of what you do as artists and our work?
Talking about AI in general, we have this conversation. This is where we are right now. We're having these conversations in or I am in my classroom, especially with my contemporary issues classes. The idea of like, all I can come to a conclusion at this point is like, it's a tool. Learn how to use that tool. Is it going to be the be-all, end-all? No. I watched the whole thing on architecture this morning. There's a guy out of I think Austin. That's one of the first guys that did 3D ceramic housing here in Texas. Made a little community out of them. He has developed some software that will basically almost put architects out of business to some degree. And so when they interview another architect, he's like, yes, it's going to change how things work. But they still believe, and this is where I come in as art, is there's always going to be something that really has to have that human touch. There's going to be something that the machine can't make, or it's just never going to read as heartfelt as it would if you made it, or I made it, or anybody in this room made it. I think if you look back in the last 15, 20 years, the resurgence somewhere around 2010, if you guys probably paid attention, that whole craft industry, all of a sudden people got tired of glossy graphic design stuff made in a computer, and now you still have that's where Etsy came from. That's all these people that are making these limited editions, short runs of like, oh, I'm going to make your wedding invitations, but it's going to be stamped with the same thing, and I carved this stamp, and so it feels more personal. I think that's what we're going to look for in art. If it's 3D, 2D, is how personal, how do I connect to it? If it still looks like, you guys know this, if you've got an HD4 or if you've seen one of these newer TVs, when those first came out, you're like, she didn't put enough makeup on. She got a big zitner for, like you could see all the high definition of this stuff. And because of that technology, you can now see where they've slipped in an artificial background. If you kind of pay attention, you know what you're looking at. So I know, I think AI is going to be a tool. I think there's no way around it. I mean, our biggest problem is slowing it down long enough so it doesn't outlearn us and build killer robots and kill us all. Which they have in Japan. They just put that out. So.
Jack, to follow on that, I'm hearing Luis talking and then talking about architects. How many people can afford to have an architect design a house? Very little. So sometimes these tools, the rich so far are going to get a handmade, and then stuff that was unreachable to some people, maybe they're going to become reachable. Because
yeah. Well, I mean, that's kind of what this guy was, that was the idea is like,
hopefully, I hope it goes that way,
Well, so the example they showed on this little mini doc I watched this morning was the idea that this architecture is like, hey, I want a Colorado-style cabin, interior, exterior. I want it to be this many square feet, I want it to have this. So you basically, it's like ChatGPT. You just tell it what you want, it renders it, and then it does a 360, and then it does a walkthrough, and it shows you, and then the guy at the end, he's like, how do you make this more affordable? There's no way we can afford it. And boom, minutes later, it shrinks it, consolidates it, still the same vibe, still theme, it's just a quarter or half the size than it was.
I think in Spain now, the houses are being 3D printed. There's a giant printer that forms concrete, and they 3D, so they're totally efficient, they'll last forever.
That's the guy that's what I'm talking about. That's the guy out of Austin.
They have that giant printer.
Right, yeah, it's just a giant 3D printer that they're making houses with. Yeah, and so, but the next level of that is they're now looking at, because that looks like, like the old earth homes, like it's just layers of sandbags and stuff. The new stuff is just, this guy wants to develop it to the point where it's almost like Legos. It's just drop and snap. And apparently there's a version, not his version, but there's a crate version now that you can supposedly buy on Amazon for under $50,000 that basically kind of comes in a box and then you just slowly, and it expands and all that. So if we can keep the corporations from buying up all the property and charging us too much rent to live in our own communities, then I think that stuff like this, and this is where AI is going to help, I think. That's the idea, that's what they want to use it for, they claim, is that build affordable housing, put everybody more on a level playing field, but we'll see. Yeah, thank you, Pedro. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Chad.
All right.
Thank you all for coming. We appreciate it. Mr. Farris will be around for a little while if you want to talk to him about his artwork.
Thank you, guys. Appreciate it.
If you want to buy something, I'm sure some of this.
Yeah, I'll be glad to take your money all day long.
I'll ask later about that one guy, the lizard posse guy.